Welcome to our channel where we dive deep into the most pressing global issues of our time. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe for more in-depth explorations of topics that could shape our future. Today, we're tackling a chilling but important subject. What if World War III were to happen? In the 20th century, two world wars forever altered the course of history. Millions of lives were lost, nations were reshaped, and the scars of those conflicts still define our world today. But as new tensions rise across the globe, whether through territorial disputes, advanced technologies, or cyber threats, the question that looms over us is, could we be on the brink of another global catastrophe? Unlike wars of the past, World War III wouldn't be confined to battlefields. This time, the weapons and strategies have evolved. From cyber attacks that could paralyze entire nations to nuclear missiles that could destroy cities in seconds, the stakes have never been higher. Before we dive into the consequences of a global conflict, we want to hear from you. What do you think could be the biggest trigger for World War III? Let us know in the comments, and be sure to stay tuned as we break down everything from the collapse of global economies to the terrifying reality of nuclear warfare. The goal isn't to spread fear, it's to understand the risks, the potential consequences, and what can be done to prevent such a disaster. So, without further delay, let's begin our journey into World War III, the unthinkable consequences. The first and most immediate impact of World War III would be felt in the global economy. As nations plunge into conflict, trade routes would shut down, supply chains would break, and the financial markets would collapse. In a matter of days, the stock markets would plummet, sending shockwaves through every corner of the world. Businesses would close, unemployment would soar, and hyperinflation would render currencies almost worthless. Imagine waking up to find that your savings can no longer buy you basic necessities like food, water, or fuel. Global trade would grind to a halt. Nations that rely on imports, especially for critical resources like energy and food, would face devastating shortages. The world's oil supplies, tech products, and agricultural goods would no longer flow between countries. This would lead to panic buying, hoarding, and riots as people struggle to secure even the bare essentials. Globalization as we know it would come to an abrupt and violent end. Countries would close their borders not to keep out armies, but to conserve their dwindling resources. What was once a system of interconnected economies would transform into isolated islands of survival. But the real suffering would be felt by ordinary people. Unemployment would rise, businesses would collapse, and millions would find themselves without jobs or income. Scarcity would become the norm, and desperation would set in. In this new world of isolation and economic collapse, the fight for survival would push societies to the breaking point. In World War III, the battlefield wouldn't just be fought with soldiers or missiles. A new front would emerge: cyberspace. Imagine entire nations crippled as power grids are taken offline, communication systems fail, and crucial infrastructure, like hospitals and transportation networks, are shut down. Hackers, working for governments, would launch devastating cyber attacks aimed at collapsing economies and undermining military operations. From stock markets to water supplies, nothing would be safe. In seconds, millions could lose access to electricity, clean water, and even their bank accounts. Cyber warfare is silent but deadly. It's invisible, but it has the power to bring an entire nation to its knees. And with no physical borders in cyberspace, the attacks would happen from anywhere in the world at any time. This is the new face of modern warfare. In World War III, the most important soldiers may not even set foot on a battlefield. They'll be behind a screen, fighting to control the world's critical infrastructure. Perhaps the most terrifying consequence of World War III would be the use of nuclear weapons. In today's world, over 13,000 nuclear warheads are held by 9 nations, each capable of unimaginable destruction. The first strike would be devastating. A single missile could annihilate an entire city, killing millions within seconds. But the true horror lies in the aftermath. Radiation would poison the land, water, and air, turning vast areas into uninhabitable wastelands. The fallout wouldn't just be immediate, For decades, entire regions would suffer from the long-term effects of nuclear radiation, birth defects, cancers, and environmental collapse. Crops would fail, animals would die, and human survivors would face a bleak future. Even if nuclear war were limited, the impact would spread far beyond the borders of the nations involved. Global weather patterns would shift, leading to nuclear winters, devastating food supplies, and sparking further humanitarian crises. In World War III, the nuclear threat would forever change the landscape of the planet, leaving scars that could take centuries to heal, if they ever heal at all. War never just impacts soldiers, it devastates civilians. In World War III, the scale of humanitarian crises would be unlike anything we've seen before. Millions would be displaced as cities become battlegrounds. Families would flee conflict zones, creating an unprecedented refugee crisis that would overwhelm neighboring nations. Refugee camps would swell beyond capacity, leaving people vulnerable to hunger, disease, and violence. The breakdown of government structures would make it even worse. Basic services like hospitals, clean water, and sanitation would collapse. In the most affected regions, entire healthcare systems would disintegrate, leaving people without access to life-saving medicine and treatment. Human rights violations would soar. With martial law and civil unrest spreading, people would be subject to abuse, forced labor, and exploitation. International humanitarian organizations, already stretched thin, would struggle to keep up with the massive demand for food, medical care, and shelter. The global response would be overwhelmed. The human toll would be catastrophic, not just from the violence of war itself, but from the breakdown of society, the collapse of order, and the failure to protect the most vulnerable. In a world ravaged by war, survival becomes the priority. As the global order crumbles and resources become scarce, individuals and communities would need to find ways to endure the chaos. For those facing the realities of World War III, preparation is the first line of defense. People would scramble to stockpile essential supplies, food, water, medical kits, and basic survival tools, anything that could help them navigate the extreme conditions. Beyond individual survival, community resilience would become crucial. Families and neighbors would need to band together, sharing resources, knowledge, and security in a world where governments might not be able to provide assistance. Local groups would emerge as the new centers of survival. But survival would also depend on adapting to the new threats, such as cyber attacks that disrupt communications and the risk of nuclear fallout. Having access to safe shelter, clean water, and sustainable food sources would become the difference between life and death. Governments and international organizations may issue emergency plans, but those who prepare for the worst in advance will be the ones who can best withstand the horrors of war. In the end, survival is not just about having the right supplies, it's about mental and physical resilience in a world turned upside down. World War III would leave the world irreparably changed, but what would come after the devastation? In the aftermath, global power structures would shift, nations would rebuild, but the scars, both physical and emotional, would remain for generations. Some governments would fall, and new leaders would rise from the ashes. Entire economies and societies would have to be reconstructed, but at an unimaginable cost. The question isn't just what the world would look like after the war, but whether we can prevent it from happening in the first place. Diplomacy and international cooperation are our greatest tools to avoid such a catastrophe. Countries must focus on reducing tensions, building stronger alliances, and addressing the root causes of conflict, such as resource shortages, territorial disputes, and economic inequality. In a world where advanced technology and nuclear weapons have the power to destroy civilization, the true victory lies in diplomacy and peacekeeping. Prevention isn't just the responsibility of governments. It's something that every individual, community, and organization must contribute to. By fostering understanding, promoting peace, and supporting efforts for conflict resolution, we can help ensure that World War III remains only a possibility, never a reality. The future is uncertain, But one thing is clear: preventing a global catastrophe requires collective effort. It's a mission we all share. Thank you for joining us on this exploration of the devastating yet crucial topic of World War III. It's a sobering reality to consider, but by understanding the risks and consequences, we can better prepare ourselves and work towards preventing such a disaster. If this video made you think, or if you have your own thoughts on how we can avoid this unthinkable future, let us know in the comments below. We encourage you to subscribe for more discussions on the global issues that matter most. Remember, the power to prevent conflict and build a better world lies in all of our hands. Together we can advocate for peace, diplomacy, and understanding. Stay informed, stay united, and together we can create a safer world.